this campaign is unusual and controversial, but there's been other similar ones, and not similar, but equally controversial campaigns in the past. The most famous is the election of 1800, with Thomas Jefferson coming in, and that actually led to a situation where that although Thomas Jefferson and his vice president won, no one knew who was the vice president or who was the president, and it had to go to Congress. Another major, and therefore that was also a political shift. It was a major, really political shift from Federalist rule to the rise of Democratic rule. The next one was as the Jeffersonian series of presidency ended, with the ending of Monroe's presidency. What happened was that the Jeffersonian party was breaking up, and the rise of Andrew Jackson and the Western populations, and there was this, and therefore the Eastern elites didn't like Jackson, and therefore they opposed them, and that's why they had a very contentious, nasty election. See, people want to say this election is nasty. Never read the 1800 elections, where they were talking stories about Thomas Jefferson's black child, and in other words, there was a. If we look at the past and from the point of view, it was the election of 1800 was a very negative, very nasty election. Okay, the 1820, I forget the Andrew Jackson won. He lost the first time, and what happened was the son of John Adams, the son John Quincy Adams, became president for 1 year, for 4 years, one-term president, because he only became president because he was elected by Congress. Because it went to the Congress to be president. Because there was no clear electoral... Even though Andrew Jackson seemed to have won, he didn't win enough electoral votes. And therefore, then what happened was, if there's no clear electoral winner in the electoral vote, the presidency goes to the House. And therefore, the House votes at one state, one vote per state. And what happened was that Jackson had no... There was... first of all, many of the congressmen didn't like Jackson. The Eastern establishment, both North and South, didn't really trust him. So they threw it behind Adams, John Quincy Adams, and John Quincy Adams became the president. But this ended the Democratic Party. This ended the Jeffersonian Democratic Party, because the next election, Andrew Jackson came back with a victory and so dominated, he swept and totally changed created the modern Democratic Party. The Democratic Party. And after that, the Democratic Party controlled America until the Civil War. Okay? Mm-hmm. Then the next contentious election was the election of the 1860 election, where it was the question of Abraham Lincoln and the Republican Party's platform against slavery, against the expansion of slavery in the Western territories, which led to the Civil War. Okay? The next big contentious election... the other ones, you can say there's big important elections, but contentious elections, and this time, the closest we'll get is probably, in this sense, to things like the election of the 1960 election, where Nixon versus Kennedy. What happened was that really that election was won by fraud. That the political machines of Chicago and in Texas rigged the ballots enough that Nixon lost. And Nixon, instead of going to the court, going to the court to overthrow the election for fraud, Eisenhower convinced him not to do it for the good, because there's too many of these developing countries having democracies, and if you went into the court, it would have been... So therefore, for the good of the country, lose.
Better good.
No, but what happened was that really soured Nixon, and after this point, he became bitter, and he became conspiratorial, and that's why it led to Watergate. That was, he was so afraid that he was going to run against the Kennedys who would cheat, so he was going to cheat as hard. He was going to spy on them and do dirty tricks, and... That's what led to Watergate. The whole attempt to, of breaking into the Watergate Hotel to get dirty, to basically get the dirty records of because it was the headquarters of the Democratic Party, but it was also the psychologist office for all the Democratic leadership psychologists, including the guy who released the Pentagon Papers. So they wanted to get the records. They knew the psychologist had on tape all the recordings. They wanted to get the recordings that he talked to the psychologist about sex and other things. They blackmailed them. Okay, that was what Watergate was about. So Watergate is a perfect. Watergate occurred because Nixon was so angry and bitter about how the 1960s election came, and that he was going to face similar attempts by the Democratic Party and the Kennedy Democrats in the '68 election, but Kennedy died. The other Kennedy died. But still, the Kennedy wing of the party was very strong, and that he felt that. Reagan's election, was, I mean, this election is a very similar one also to what happened in 1964. The Goldwater, Johnson. See, we forget that Kennedy just died, and the nation was traumatized by Kennedy's death, and what happened there is the way the media and the elites tried to demonize Goldwater as a dangerous threat. Remember the Daisy commercial with the nuclear bomb? That if you elect Goldwater, there's going to be a nuclear war. And so therefore that was a very contentious election by the way the media and the things worked against Goldwater. So there's lots of this is not new, but this is unique in enough. This has similarities to two things. This is similar to the rise of Andrew Jackson, of a populist rebellion against a oligarchic controlling Eastern elite. That's one way it's similar. The other way it's similar to the Goldwater thing. Because what really hurt Goldwater was that the establishment Republicans abandoned him.
Same as Trump.
And therefore there is a... But by doing that destroyed that Republican Party. Remember, the Republican Party that abandoned Goldwater was the Rockefeller, we call it the Rockefeller Northern Republican, liberal republicanism. That was the old Republican establishment. And what happened to them is they were destroyed by, in other words, when the after effect of the Goldwater thing was the Goldwater wing of the party won the next term, particularly with the rise of Reagan. Okay? And that was that moment where the Reagan Revolution and that emerged.